Okay, I think we are ready to start. So let me make sure. Okay. So I want to welcome everyone. Thank you for being here this afternoon. This is the first Smart Artists Workshop presented by the City Art Board from the City of Las Cruces. And I just want to let the attendees know that we will take all of your questions at the end of the presentation. And you just need to raise your hand if you have a question, and I will allow you to talk. And everybody will get their chance. So yeah, let's, I'm going to turn it over to Katrina, and she will introduce our guest presenter today.
All right, awesome. My name is Katrina Chandler. I am the secretary for the City Art Board. I appreciate all of you who are attending this workshop that we're doing. This is the first of 4 that we are planning to present throughout the year. The goal is to help local artists get set up to be able to do art professionally, but also apply for specific types of public art works. So in the first workshop, which Marissa Sage will be helping us with today, is how to write an artist statement and a CV. Then we will be working on taking photographs of artwork and publishing to a website. After that is the business side of art. And the last workshop we want to run is how to apply for public art, for a public using Cafe. So like I said, Marissa Sage, she's the director of the University Art Museum at the new art building Devastali Hall at New Mexico State University. She helped me immensely write my CV and my artist statement, so that it is a beautiful piece of work. So I know that she's going to be wonderful and have a nice presentation, and she's very knowledgeable and has to read a bunch of these all the time anyway. So I'm going to let her go ahead and take over, and just really appreciate her being here. So thank you so much, and yay.
Thank you, Katrina. Thanks for inviting me, and thank you to everyone who is here today. So I do read an enormous amount of artist statements, and I think about artist statements in relationship to arts writing in general. So when I talk about and do this presentation, a lot of what I'm talking about is applicable, of course, to your artist statement, but it also translates to a lot of different forms of art writings that I know all of you have to do as artists, as you're working towards different submissions, when you are writing reviews of other artists' work, or when your work is going to be part of a review. How do you kind of utilize the language of your artist statement to be part of that as well? So I go through a little bit of all of that in this talk. And usually I run this type of things as a Q&A. So I wasn't 100% sure that we were doing a webinar today. So keep your questions to the end, and I'll try and get through everything. And if you have questions that aren't just artist statement related, you can of course ask those as well. So in my life within the arts, I have had the opportunity to read, I would say on at least, let's go with 1,000 at the low end of different artist statements. And very often, I think one of the first things that we think about when we think about an artist statement is like, what is the utility of an artist statement? Like, what is it going to be used for? And very often in cases like today, where we're talking about applying for public art projects, it's pretty cut and dry, right? You're trying to tell a committee that's going to look at your artwork who you are, what your work is about, and why they should choose you in kind of a very short paragraph form. But that's not the only thing that your artist statement will be used for. Your artist statement will be used even as a didactic on a wall to explain an art piece. Your artist statement will be used in a press release, hopefully. Your artist statement will be used in a review, hopefully, of your work. So one of the first fundamental kind of questions can be audience, like who's looking at your work, who's reading this statement, who is it for, what is it for? And I always kind of come back to like the concept of art writing in general, which can be just about audience. And when audiences come to work, they say, okay, well, how and why is this art? And, Donald Judd, who's the piece that we're seeing in front of us right now, says if someone calls it art, it's art, right? Well, that's all well and good, except that, very often people need to they need to understand that. They need to kind of be brought to that concept and not just have that concept be assumed. And so, like I said, when I think about writing an artist statement, I think about art writing in general. So we write about art in order to clarify and to account for our responses to works that interest, excite, or frustrate us. And this is all from Sylvian Barnett, which is a general kind of short writing book that's used in most academic settings. It's a really simple, easy book. I suggest that anyone who's interested in just starting to write about their work, get this. It's a quick read. And when we write, we teach ourselves, we learn our likes, our dislikes, our uncertainties. And the term critical thinking suggests careful analysis, conscientious or deliberate inquiry. And so what Sylvian is basically saying is that our art writing, whether it be writing about our own work, our own artist statements, or about artwork in general, is really kind of to clarify things, to make people understand it. We can't necessarily tell them that whether they should like it or dislike it, but we should give them the basis for their own visual analysis. And so through this presentation, I give you a lot of different books that and quotes and links. Write them down, look them up. There's a lot of resources for writing artist statements that aren't just me, who's gotten most of my experience from reading them versus writing them. But this is a really great, again, simple, quick read, which talks and helps you write an effective artist statement for different forms of materials. So like I said, your artist statement, and I'll talk about this over and over again as I talk about as we go through the presentation, your artist statement is used over and over and over again. So when you write it, you're not just writing it for yourself or for the audience that's going to read it to get you this public art works potentially, but you might be utilizing this as a blanket statement that will be used by a lot of people for a lot of different things. So writing about your work or others helps a reader or a viewer to see the work from your perspective, therefore seeing either your work or the work you're writing about more clearly. So perspective. A big question about artist statements is what person or perspective should I be writing in? And that comes down to, again, context. Who's going to be reading this and what are you writing it for? But most of you at this point, I'm sure, know this because you've taken, basic English courses. But first person narrative, which is the I, right? The I point of view is very often used when you're writing for yourself, right? So you're talking about how you create something, why you create it, how you're going to create it. You are is your second person singular, or what we almost always see in artist statements, again, because those statements are used widely, is a third person narrative. So he or she, so speaking about yourself as the other or the third person singular, is almost always the voice used in an artist statement. And that's based upon context, but very often, for instance, when you apply for a public arts work, when you're putting your statement up online, this is the personhood you're going to take. So again, why are we writing? So tell the reader, what is this art, or what your art is all about? To tell the reader, what is the inspiration? To tell the reader, what is our critical analysis of this work, potentially? and to help the reader ask better questions, which is kind of my favorite way to think about an artist statement and artwork in general, right? Like, what does art do? I believe the basics of what art does is it helps us to ask better questions versus having an answer or solving some major global problem, or it's really about kind of helping the viewer understand something differently, have a different perspective, look at it differently. Now, can your artist statement do that? Maybe, maybe not. But really what you're hoping is to set up that analysis, right? Like you're setting it up for a broad range of audiences often. So what do I need to write to assist the viewer in understanding what is in front of them? And think about this as like your written studio visit. Many of you have done studio visits before or will do studio visits where you invite people, collectors, friends, other artists, curators, critics into your studio to look at your work and think about your work. That's basically what you're trying to do, is tell everyone in a synopsis what you would say if you were sitting in that studio visit. Others will call it an elevator pitch about yourself. You're giving your elevator pitch. So treat the viewer as if they have never read about work of art in their life. And I think that that's really important. I mean, I take that perspective as a curator here at New Mexico State University Art Museum all the time. We have a varied audience. We have to, of course, think about the pedagogy and what's being taught here at the university, but we also have to speak and think about the kids that are coming in to take our workshops, or their parents who might really not be into work. Like all of these different audiences, our community is who we're thinking about when we're curating an exhibition. And so we want to be able to define a work for every spectrum of those different community members, everyone that could potentially walk in here. So Ruben the Grown is an artist that I've worked with a lot, and somebody who's been able to really kind of synthesize down his work into a really beautiful artist statement. And what I thought about when choosing Ruben was to think about an artist statement versus a series or an artwork or concept statement, right? What are these two things? How do these two things function separately? And I thought it was a good way for us to kind of break apart language and the way that we utilize those different personhoods, right? Or perspectives. So one of the major questions, major things that we're doing in an artist statement is kind of the same thing we do with invitations or ways that we invite people to look at anything, right? Which is the who, what, where, when, whys, right? Our W's. And we want to get all of that answered for everyone, for every kind of application that we're doing really quickly, simply, no more than 2 paragraphs. And so this applies to artist statements. And what I like to say is 1 paragraph total for the who's, the where's, and the what's, and then another paragraph total for your bio and anything that's really important to get across to that committee or that collector or that viewer, right? So using Ruben as an example, with the who's, we've got, again, and notice the perspective here is third person, though of course he wrote it. Ruben the Grown is an American contemporary visual artist, best known for his representational watercolor. So we got the what and drawings, pulling inspiration from his own life. So what, maybe why experiences, as well as all those of people and places he depicts. The Grown's work is defined by its highly personal narratives, often grounded in themes of memory, psychology, sexuality, and identity. The Grown's figures and environments are characterized by an introspective atmosphere that plays homage to the in-between moments and minute details that frame our lives. So we've got it kind of all there. We understand who he is, where he's from, what he's doing, when he's doing it, and why he's doing it, all within what is technically 3 sentences. And then you've got your bio here. What I say a good bio should always have is where you went to school, where you've shown, the largest institutions that you've shown in, whether that is kind of, large internationally or regionally large. So whether that's the Las Cruces Museum of Art or the MoMA, that is up to you, right? And understanding of like who and where, again, your audience is. So you might say to a public art project in Las Cruces, hey, I've shown a bunch of times at the Las Cruces Museum of Art, because that might be indicative of what you want to tell a public arts project in Las Cruces. Or you might want to say, hey, I'm a huge international artist and I've shown at, you know, the Louvre in Paris and the MoMA in New York and you know, and all these other places across the United States and internationally. And that's going to be up to, this could be edited, right? So another point about artist statements is, who are you writing to? You got to edit it. You always have to have multiple versions. And I like to say that you should have like almost kind of a binder of different statements that can be edited for different reasons. Expressing your ideas clearly. And I'll say this in a little bit of a different way, though I think I say it again further in this talk. Art speak, you know, this very jargony, very heavy language that many of us use, especially in academia and arts institutions, are not helpful to your average reader of a simple artist statement where you're trying to get what you do across. Katrina said that I highly edited her artist statement in the beginning. And when I edit artist statements, I will often just click 10-cent words. You know, it's great that you can speak the language of an artist and of the arts world and of you know, the intelligentsia, but people need to understand what you're doing. So be concise and write specifically about your work. This is not a statement about others' works. And this is really a statement about you and what you're doing and what your practice is. And I always say, avoid broad generalizations about art. You know, you're not attempting to talk about the history of art in your statement. You're not attempting to talk about definitions of what sculpture is or what installation or social practice is. If you do use social practice, maybe you need a line that explains how you work with your community or how your work engages with the greater global issues going on, but you're not necessarily going to define what social practice is in one sentence in your 2 to 3 sentence paragraph of your artist statement. Do not define artist movements for the reader when you're speaking about, which is exactly what I was just talking about. You know, you're not going through these great, don't explain what modernism is if you're trying to say you're postmodernist. And then language, the use of language. One of the things that I noticed a lot in artist statements is the ways that we use verbs, nouns can often be very lazy, self-deprecating. They can be really passive. So one of the things that I talk a lot about when I'm talking about artist statements and looking at artist statements with especially emerging, budding young artists is, yes, of course, you're working your way through things and through ideas, you should be, but take on that fear and purpose and start thinking actively and positively. So when composing, we often make lazy choices, especially when choosing verbs. We feel enticed by the generic all-purpose verbs such as deal with or show, which on the surface can sound snappy, but we're really looking for particulars here. You know, we're looking for to leave the meaningless behind. So active verb examples will be yield, illustrate, illuminate, reveal, employ, clarify, indication. And so you're really thinking about these different words that actualize, that action. Avoid weak verbs. I am attempting. I'm trying. I hope. Maybe one day I will find the solution. Assume that you're doing it. Feel strong in your statement and talk about what you're doing, not what you're attempting to do. So for instance, like I am attempting, you're doing. I try, you are. I hope one day you're looking to say, I'm doing it now. This is what I'm doing. So again, taking Ruben on, who's working with these figurative pieces, these very intricate intense watercolor figures. One of the things that I always use Ruben about is, people can shy away and be fearful of nudity. So how do you break the idea of the human form and why one uses the human form away from the concept of nudity or sexuality or these taboos? And that can be with an artist statement, right? That can be with explaining why it is important, especially in times of tumult, to use the human body to explain the everyday influences and life of all of us. We all have bodies, and sometimes when it comes down to these tumultuous times, it's the easiest thing to understand and to start exploring. And so very often, and you'll hear that post-wars or pre-wars, you'll go between abstraction and the human form. And so how do you get like these big concepts? How do you inform readers that can help them understand things like that? Why nudity isn't a taboo, why it's really important to think about this work differently, but also that it's not necessarily our job within an artist statement to persuade someone to like something or to understand that, but to simply explain why one would use it. So I explained this in relationship to looking at different ways that we could look at how Ruben writes about his work in first person versus, as we saw before, in his artist statement. So he's speaking about this very specific theme that he worked on, where in this glass house, there's an intimate expose of what we keep hidden from others. And in many cases, what we hide from ourselves. Working with volunteers, now, why might we use this statement? How is this statement, which is talking about a series of works that might be exhibited in a gallery versus an artist statement used? This is actually what we ask artists to do when they're thinking about a whole entire series in relationship to their statement, because this can also be pulled apart by press releases, by critics. And so he's kind of taking these concepts that he's distilled down into his artist statement, and he's broadening them to the series of work that he's talking about. And then he can do the vice versa. He can take it out of the first person, that I interviewed each model about their lives, personalities, and histories. And we can say Ruben interviews each model about their lives, their personalities, and their histories. And through this process, their personal narratives are dismantled and reconstructed into the watercolors we see here. So I wanted us to kind of think about how language, whether it's in the first person or the third person, can be used in different ways. So this might be a curatorial statement that's on the wall in a gallery, versus it could then be used for a whole series to explain it, versus piece of it can be pulled apart to be used as the artist statement would be, that could be then fed to press. So then third person, here we go, as I was just saying. So in his watercolors, The House of Glass, Ruben gives us, he interviewed each. So I just explained this while we were reading through it, but just to understand that then that statement, which was written by Ruben, was taken in, put into the third, like completely stolen essentially, which is fine because that's what a lot of press does, and brought into this format and used by Juxtaposed magazine. So these are the different ways that you can think about, if I write an artist statement and then it's taken by, put into a press release, and then that press release is taken by Juxtaposed magazine and used to write their review, how is that all going to translate? And what am I going to give up front in my artist statement that then could be used for all those different purposes? And so I kind of think about that again in art writing in general, right? Not just artist statement, not just what would be given for, again, a submission to explain who you are within an arts project or within a, let's say, a residency, but also how would I write about my own art, or how would I review another person's piece? So thinking about breaking that whole paragraph down, you've got your description, you've got your analysis of the work, you've got a personal report of how you, what, again, where are those who, what's, when, whys, and then you've got an evaluation, right? So you get the press then evaluates those three statements. And so thinking about your artist statement as like a totality of how one might use your writing, you really kind of want to think about all those things. Like, does this describe my work? Is it an analysis of my work? Is there a personal report in here? And how might then, if this is the only thing that a critic actually sees or a panel actually sees, how might they evaluate that? And does that work for what I'm trying to do when I submit? I always say the best way to do that is to print out your draft and really think about like where that draft, again, what audience is seeing that draft? So will this help anyone through my writing? Does it help to see what I've written next to, for instance, a piece or multiple pieces, or next to my the maquette that I made for my public art project? If I take this draft and I put it next to it, does it actually say what I wrote? Like, is this doing what I written that it's going to do? And it will help me visualize my writing in relationship to the artwork. I can say, you know what? No, I'm like looking at this piece of writing next to this maquette, and this is not what this public arts project is going to do in relationship to the work I make. And then, like I said, you're doing that right next to the piece. So, printing out your draft will really kind of, it visualizes the words for you and it actualizes the words for you. So I'm asking myself, am I providing the essential information about the work for the audience that I'm going for? Am I analyzing the work properly in relationship to maybe the research I do or the concepts or the formal aspects of what I do? Have I answered all the questions for all the audiences? And I keep saying curators, press, but of course, general art viewers. And then what questions might I want a curator to help me write through with these ideas? So one of the things that I often say is like, who can you speak to once you've written a couple of drafts of your press release? Like, who can I speak to within my community, within my connections, within my friends, within my colleagues, my coworkers, et cetera, who can say, hey, does this make sense in relationship to, hey, you've never seen my work. What do you think my work looks like? Or, hey, you've seen my work a lot. Do you think that this is a good way to generalize the work, or to who, what, where, when, why the work? And like I said, I always say no art speak as much as possible. Of course, like, you don't need to write your artist statement for a 5-year-old, but general. So then the other thing that I'm speaking about is a CV. Okay, so can we take, because I'm going between an artist statement, which is very different than a CV. Could we potentially take questions now? Katrina or anyone?
Yeah, sure. If anyone has questions, we can
Yeah, because I'm going to go into CVs and resumes, and while artist statements and bios really relate, I would say that that's a kind of almost a different topic.
Mm-hmm. So attendees, if you have a question, please just press that little hand raising. And I see that one of the panelists also has a question. So let's start with the first attendee, whose name is Gus Ramirez. Gus, go ahead and unmute yourself. Gus, can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
I can't hear him.
Yeah, I heard him.
You heard him? Okay.
So when we were doing our artist statements for, like, say that I'm going out for candidacy in the fall. However, I'm also using that same artist statement for an exhibition that I want to get into. How would I deal with like having like redrafting that same artist statement for two very different things?
So tell me the two situations again, your candidacy, and then what was the second one?
The second one is a queer show that's happening in Spain. And they're requesting a artist statement since I made it into the semifinals to see if I officially get into the show. However, I'm like, since my practice is very much linked to what I'm currently doing, I don't know how to deal with the idea of like, I'm up for candidacy and I have a certain type of artist statement.
Yep.
And now that this is the real art world that I'm applying to. How would I deal with like redrafting something like that?
I mean, I think one of the things to do is to kind of think about the perspective of those who know your work versus those who do not. So even though candidacy is asking you to write a generalized artist statement, they know your work and they want you writing about the most current body of work that you're doing versus a more generalized, this is who Gus is to the world, right? Because when you're writing for a group show in Spain, they don't know you. They don't know at all your practice. So I think what needs to happen is you kind of have to take like a macro versus micro view of your work, or, you know, kind of, this is the totality. You know how if you looked at Rubens for that first artist statement, it's very broad. But it's still tied to him, right? Versus this is a very specific body of work. So I think what you're looking to do is for the Spain, you've got to get more general. And for candidacy, you've got to get more specific and academic. And the tweaking in the language there is going against everything I just said and getting a little bit more 10 centy versus all audiences. Does that answer your question? And does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I kind of figured I would have to like retweak everything because I was like starting to think, I was like, I mean, I've been at NMSU for what's going to be a year and a half when I go out for candidacy. Every professor and every faculty and staff knows my art to a certain degree versus like somewhere where like, I don't know, no one knows my art.
Right. And I mean, I guess it can be very difficult to do, but it's almost like becoming objective about your own practice as much as possible. And I often say like getting out of your own way, like it's almost impossible, but imagine you've never seen your own work. Like, how would you explain it to someone if it wasn't yours, right? Like if you can pull away from it and you could say, you know, I see Donovan in here. Like one of the good things that you could do, especially in grad school, that a lot of people don't get outside of school, is you can say, hey, Donovan, I'll give you a quick crit of exactly what I'm seeing. And you give me a quick crit of exactly what you're seeing, and take some of that language, right? Like take some of the broader strokes, like, you know, versus the more like, you're in it, you're so in it. So try and get out. You need a different perspective, right? You need a different way of analyzing your own work. There was another hand up.
There's also a question in the chat.
Oh, okay. Where the
Katrina, can you see that, or do you want me?
I can go ahead and ask it if
Yeah,
you want.
go ahead.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so Donovan asked, she's curious to hear your opinion on alternative artist statements like poems and the like.
Again, it's about what are you doing it for, right? So I'm all for it. I really like funky artist statements. I even like performative like artist statements, but it really is about audience. You know, like I can tell you right now, if I'm on a panel for a jury of any kind, which I've been on, again, I've been on hundreds of them, both for public arts projects and for, you know, residencies. I've been on just so many different juries. And when I can't actually understand what you're doing it's a really easy way to weed you out, to be honest, because you're going through sometimes, I've been on panels where we've got like 2,000 artist submissions. It's just a real simple way to be like, aha, you're being cutesy cut, right? So that's, that's about audience, and that's about perspective, and that's about, what you're doing this for. Now, if you have a solo exhibition, and poetry is a big part of your practice, and poetry speaks to exactly what you're doing, that is your prerogative within your solo exhibition. And you and the gallerists and the curators you've worked with on that show have decided that that properly defines the work for you in relationship to what you're trying to get in front to, your audience. You got to know your audience, I guess, is always the answer. Who is your audience and what are you trying to accomplish with it? And don't worry, Donovan, I won't cut you if I see a poem in a. I think Alicia, did Alicia have a question, or her hand's down now?
Okay. So Marissa, I have a question. This is Ceci, and I apologize. I forgot to introduce myself to everyone. My name is Ceci Vasconcelos. I'm the art program coordinator for the city of Las Cruces. So, but I was just curious if you could talk a little bit more about when artists are first starting out and maybe they haven't had so much gallery experience. Is there a way to maybe substitute some other type of experience for that in their artist statement?
I mean, I think one of the ways you can do it in the beginning is by not pointing it out. So if you look, I'm just going to go really quickly. Hold on, let me click back on this. Look back at Ruben, right? Like, if you basically kept this first paragraph on the right-hand side, and that 3 sentences says a lot, and you have one line underneath it that explains kind of where you've shown, or because, most likely you went to school, right? You're kind of playing with your experience, and I think no one in the art world expects every single person to have shown before. So, yeah, it's about kind of, you can truncate it and you can play with it without saying I've shown nowhere. You can it's about language and the use of language. So, where you graduated from is still a potential of adding that into your artist statement. Maybe you've shown in 2 group shows. That's fine. Negron has shown in 2 group shows in San Antonio, New Mexico, and Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. So I think that's just about how much importance you give to anything within the statement. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
No problem. Okay, should we move on to CVs? I'm going with Katrina's shake. Okay. It's a little bit drier, right? Like, it's not like a fun, like, artist statements can be super fun and can be playful and are interesting to write and difficult to write. CVs are pretty like cut and dry. They are not supposed to be embellished. They are literal. So what's the difference between a CV and a resume is often a question I get. So a resume is a 1-page summary of your work experience and background relevant to a job generally, or a gallery you're applying to. And a CV is a longer academic diary that includes all your exhibition reviews and publications, your grants, your residencies, your experiences, your certificate. I mean, basically everything is in, it's like, everything except for the kitchen sink. Now, with that said, just like your artist statement, your CV will often have many uses as well. So for instance, if you do get picked up by a gallery will very often make your CV much more concise. And we'll look at a couple of those as we go on here. But also you can kind of see in the visuals of what a CV looks like versus a resume, right? So you kind of start with your general information. I'll go through this again in a second, but then you've got your education. We're going to actually say that rather than professional appointments, here is where we might put solo exhibitions or exhibitions in general. And I'll talk kind of that we'll talk about, you know, what if you don't have a lot of exhibitions? What does that look like? And your resume is like that one page, like knockout, looks real pretty. You want to call Katrina and ask her to help you design it because I'm sure she's super good at it. And it should get like real quick down nitty gritty. This is what I could do for you job wise. CV rules, and there are rules. Avoid making your CV complicated. So like, as I said, it's a straightforward document. You're not like, you know, writing anything fancy in here. You're not explaining the concept of an exhibition, for instance, which I've seen a lot and should not happen. Easy to read fonts and type sizes help facilitate readings. You should have a longer version and a shorter version for things that you need. Like I said, if you do get picked up by a gallery or different places will help you do that, but you really should have that anyway for yourself, in my opinion. And listing things in reverse chronological order is how we do things in CVs. So you start with your most recent education, for instance, and you go backwards. And always start with the basics. So I used an artist that I've worked with a lot, Jessica Stoller. Jessica's represented by a gallery. So when the gallery gives out her CV, they don't want collectors contacting Jessica directly. So they only put her place of birth, her year of birth, and where she and that she lives and works in Brooklyn, right? But for all of us that are newer to this art world, and here is where we decide what kind of information we want to put. So do we want to put an easy contact, like an address to our studio or a PO box? Do we want a phone number? Definitely very important is usually an email. We want people to be able to contact us. So that's often underneath our nice, beautiful, bolded name. We'll put our email, potentially our phone number, potentially our studio access, but we'll always put our name and information about where we are. So exhibition record, which is often a question, and it's almost kind of the same question of like, what if I haven't shown a lot, right? That's okay. Again, everyone starts somewhere, right? And we all know that. So there are many ways to present an exhibition record. For less experienced artists, what we're going to, and potentially just out of undergraduate or graduate school or just restarting their career from a different life, it is probable that we don't have a lot of exhibitions to list. So what we're going to do is, instead of listing solo exhibitions or group exhibitions, we're going to have just an exhibitions listing, okay? And we're going to go ahead and we're going to start with the start date, the title of the exhibition, the venue, city, and state. And if there's a catalog, you can also put in here that there's a catalog as part of that exhibition. And so here's an example of a new artist versus maybe a seasoned artist. So here we've got our exhibitions, solo exhibition, MFA thesis, Catherine Nash Gallery, and the information there. So you can actually call out whether this is a solo exhibition or two-person or group under generalized exhibitions. Then, like here with Jessica again, we've got our solo exhibitions versus our selected group exhibitions, right? So, I'm sorry, this is actually Erin Riley's. So Erin Riley's showing at PPOW right now. So she's got her information about the show that she's in currently at PPOW in Chelsea, and then everything that's happened since 2010. Now, another question that I get often is, how much should you have on your CV? Notice that I circled, and why I used Erin's is that she said selected group exhibitions. It is much more likely, as you are becoming an artist who's showing more and more and more, that you're going to be put into more and more group shows. there are people who could fill a library with the amount of group shows they've been in. So that's when you kind of start to think about what's a cutoff date here, right? Like Erin's definitely been making work since prior to 2010. But maybe she started her solo career really showing more in 2010. So that's easy for her because she didn't have that many solo shows. Maybe use that as a cutoff for your group shows then. So if you've had 4 times the amount of group shows than solo shows, you choose a date and choose a cutoff date because you do not want your CV to extend past 10 pages, absolutely. But also you don't want your group exhibitions to go on for more than 2 pages. It's just ridiculous. So choose a cutoff page, a cutoff date, and stick to that date and say selected group exhibitions. Other things that could be put into your CV that could be very important are, especially if you're a social practice artist or relational aesthetical artist, you're going to be working on collaborative projects. If you're working on a lot of commissions, you get a whole bunch of public art projects. You're going to want to put these in here. If you're in collections, if you're in artist residencies, these are all things that you can put and should put into your CV. I really, really like College Art Association standards and guidelines. Oops, sorry. So I put that in here. Everyone who's interested in this topic, write this URL down because it is, in my opinion, one of the best kind of comprehensive ways of exactly how you should put the information in the right format for all of these different commissions, collections. They tell you everything and it's really, really great. So like I said, residencies, awards and grants, visiting lectures could be something you want to put on there, especially if you're looking to become a visiting lecturer. And then a lot of questions that I get about CV, especially recently, are about online media versus offline media. It's basically the same, right? Like, you've got your Chicago style, and then you've got your different ways of quoting the different journals that you might be part of, or the different papers that might have written about you. It's very often that what you're going to do is you're going to put the author of the whether it's a blog or it's a website or it's a what have you. You're going to put the name or the title of the reading or the writing of or the blog, and then you're going to put the date, and you're going to put the URL. Which is just a little bit different than putting the actual magazine, which is what you usually do. You put the magazine and then you put the date. Now, I think you could put the date afterwards, but that's kind of here or there. I mean, no one's going to go like redlining your CV because you put the date before the URL. That's my whole CV talk. It's not, it's pretty cut and dry, right? I mean, it's no fun. It's not a fun thing you asked me to do here, Katrina.
Important thing though.
It's very important. It's very important. I do think, what I like to recommend books. Like I said, like the art, like for art writing, like that's one of the quintessentials. I really like art/work. Which is kind of like, how do I become an artist? And they also give like really simple, easy to follow steps on artist statements and resumes and versus CVs, and CVs versus, bios, and bios versus artist statement. All these things are really good and kind of clear and easy in artwork. And so I would suggest that book as well, but really like free. Back to this website. They are great, the collegeart.org. They've got so many good informative different forms of standards, like standard practice for this and standard practice for that. It's really great.
So I guess if there's questions about writing a CV, that would be, if anybody has questions about that, would be.
Yeah, and then anyone can ask me any questions. I'm down if you want to ask me about public art stuff, or I mean, you might have really riveting questions about the CV, but
Possibly, I don't know. maybe not. It was so concise
Yeah.
that.
So anyone have questions about CVs, artist statements, or anything else related to?
Or about my amazing drawing skills on this PowerPoint slide? That's a question mark, just if you're wondering. Oh, see, I need you to do all that for me, Katrina. I mean, this is why I'm a curator and not an artist.
Do it. Let's collaborate.
I was really proud of myself, though, that I started drawing on my PowerPoint.
Beautiful. I love this pink vibe that it's got going on too.
Thank you.
I know that I have a question that I want to ask.
Okay.
So I know that it's not super important. And I feel like there's this stress about how CVs need to be in this very specific way. And I
Yeah.
understand that is because there's a way that curators or juries are going to read it and be able to understand it. But how important is it? I see that on the new artist example, they're oh my gosh, my mind went blank. The titles of the shows, they're italicizing that, and then in this season one, they're not italicized. How important are those types of editing, when people are looking at these CVs?
I have a conflicting way of answering this, right? As a professor and in academia, they care. Again, it's an easy way to weed you out of things. So it's important, right? That all titles is italicized is important. But obviously PPOW, a very, very fancy, fantastic New York, wonderful female driven led gallery, they don't care.
Yeah.
So, I think again, it's about audience and it's about professionalism. So I would say you italicize titles. Either you quote them or you italicize them. So do it within your CV and they can change it. They can do whatever they want, that gallery. This is from the gallery website. So it's very possible that Erin Riley gave it to them not italicized, right? Or rather italicized, and they blanket make everything look the same across the board for all their artists.
Yeah. All right. Elisa does have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, it's nice to meet you. This is Elisa.
Hi.
I have a question here, and I'm asking it not so much on my behalf, but on the ones that will be viewing this afterwards, and maybe for the ones that are viewing it now. I just have a feeling that this will really touch a lot of people with this specific question. When dealing with starting out in the beginning, and of course, we're all familiar with the phrase, with the coin phrase, imposter syndrome.
Mhm.
Now, quite naturally, a lot of people are under the impression, especially when you're working from a place of spending so much time and energy and money in academia, right, for our students. I've always encouraged people to, if you can't get to a table, make your own table, pull up your own chair. Now, for individuals who are out there trying to get their first start, right, we're talking about CVs and everything else, what about for the artist who hasn't had their start, the one who hasn't been trusted to do that yet? Would it be frowned upon for them to, in a sense, create their own opportunity, which would ultimately be their first opportunity, or if not second opportunity, where they sell it? They have people there. They have a pop-up shop venue somewhere or something where they show that it's backed by NMSU because they got one of the professors to sponsor, something like that, right? Would that be less of tact to put that on there as their first, especially when you associate it with, hey, I had 500 people walk by, or it was up for 3 months, because ultimately it's coming from them, right? Is it of tact to do that? Is it okay to toot your own horn and do that?
100%. I mean, that's the thing, this isn't I teach a professional practice course and I do a lot of lectures, at our university, but I've done a lot of, the most important thing is to get your stuff out there, right? So like some people will say, well, I can't show in a restaurant, like it's not a gallery. It's like, well, you got to start showing somewhere. And you know, a lot of people will use the like fake it till you make it, but I don't think it's faking it. I mean, you've got to start somewhere. So creating your own opportunity is the most important thing that you can do. That's how you create your networks. That's how you find people who have similar interests to you. That's how you surround yourself with artists that you're interested in potentially working with or collaborating with. That's how you find collectors on your own that you could go to when you do get a gallery with. So yes, I don't actually think that those are not real or tacky or imposter at all. You have to make your own. And what do you think PPOW did? PPOW got you know, they were two really talented, brilliant women who started a gallery. Okay, so because they started a gallery that wasn't creating their own opportunity, it took them years to build to the reputation that they now have, which is, you know, a really important role within the art world. You know, especially like I said, they represent a lot of important female artists, and they themselves are these strong women of the art world. But they created their opportunity, right? Like it just happens to be in Chelsea, which is fancy, you know? So it's really, I think every opportunity is worthy of your resume.
Is it okay?
Hey, yo. Thank you, Miss Sage. You have empowered someone today. Like, I love your, like you, that's what I was hoping would come from this, because artists at the end of the day are creators. Like they're the ones that are coming up with this vision, right? That no one else can have, or they're twisting and turning and curving and everything else, right? And so I had one more question. It's a pretty short question in that in sales, we use something where we say, because I know you had said, express ideas clearly. That was your words. Like your job is not to persuade, right?
Mhm.
And something that we use as an approach in sales is we just call it out what it is, what it does, and what it can do for you. And so knowing that artists learn differently, because ultimately this of all things is a Zoom call for artists, the most creative learners in the world, where teachers literally have to go to classes to learn other different ways to reach these auditory, kinesthetic, creative learners, right? So this is probably the most black and white terms to reach artists. And so I would actually like to play a little bit of an exercise that's short as far as what it is, what it does, and what it can do for you, by me asking you this with an example that someone can really take away from this session, an example that they would do. So I ask you, as a person that is looking at your work, right? What is it? Any example?
I don't understand the question. Say it in a different way to me.
So we are two people here at a interview per se, and you're presenting something to me.
Okay.
I want to know, I'm just going to ask you 3 questions, because it's just an exercise for people to learn how to be precise, right? And clear with their words.
Okay.
It can be anything. You can even call it a duck. Now, right off the front, what is it?
Do you mean me?
What are you selling me? What's your artwork today? What would you like to win? What's the bid? What is it? Yeah, I'm going there.
What's your elevator pitch?
We're
I think
doing
that's
this.
what
My
he's trying to get
elevator
to.
pitch.
We're doing it. I'll do it again.
Oh,
Hold on
man.
one second. I'll do it again. So it's going to be, I'm going to
Okay.
ask 3 questions.
Okay.
What is it?
Yep. Okay. So.
What does it do?
Yep.
And what can it do for me?
All right,
Whatever I
well,
represent.
I'm going to answer with what you've given me, which is it's a new way to think about your work that helps empower to be able to sell to anyone.
And what does it do?
Empowers.
And what can it do for me?
helps you sell yourself.
Hey, there we go. Thank you so much for playing that with me. You're great. Thank you. Thanks, guys. Bye.
All right, well, if there aren't any other questions from our attendees or other panelists, then I think we've reached the 1 hour mark. And I hope that we've learned some good tips here today. I know I have. So thank you so much, Marissa, for doing this for us.
Oh,
And
you're so welcome. My pleasure.
thank you, Katrina, for bringing us Marissa. And we hope you'll join us for the next workshop, and we will be posting when and where. Maybe it might be in person this time. So would be so much better, honestly. So thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Have a good afternoon. Okay, I'm going to stop recording. I stopped the live stream.